Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features part 2 of my review of Alpha Flight number 1 from 1985. This is issue 1 of a 2-issue miniseries featuring a crossover between the X-Men and Alpha Flight. So what happened in the first installment is the X-Men and Alpha Flight have made their way to the source of a wrongness in northern Canada, and out investigating ahead of the plane carrying the two teams are Rogue and Northstar. And in the first half of this issue, Rogue touched Northstar, and of course, given her mutant powers, she absorbed his memories and knows a lot about the turmoil this particular character is in. So we have a couple of pages of them having a heart-to-heart, and also excellent acting from the two characters in their body language in Paul Smith's art. So here Rogue is about to land beside Northstar, and she asks him, "Find anything?" And he replies, "No." And then in French, "Go back to the others, I need no help." And Rogue says, "Well, I thought I had a chip on my shoulder." And then this is really interesting. We see that she speaks French. By the way, we speak French ourselves in the Mississippi Bayou country. So that's intriguing, because I don't think there's any other reference to the fact that Rogue speaks French other than that. And of course it casts an interesting light on, years down the road, her romantic entanglement with Gambit, another French speaker. So the heart-to-heart between these two continues, where Northstar rebuffs her and says, "You forget, Mon Brave, for a minute there back at the hospital, I was you. Every thought, every experience, every emotion, every memory, it was quite an experience." So Northstar feels violated, but she says she had no choice. She had to prevent him from attacking the X-Men. "I can't control my powers," she explains. "I touch someone, they're zapped. It's been that way since I was a kid and will probably remain so till I die. So don't quote me no chapter and verse about how tough and lonely life is, Mr. Jean-Paul Beaubier. I'm writing my own book. You got no call for such anger, Northstar. You got talent, skills, you're a champion." But Northstar is, part of his turmoil is the fact that he's a mutant, so his superpower, which is super speed, he reckons without it, he would be nothing. He would have nothing and be nothing. So let's turn the page. But as I said, I really like the body language here. We've got Rogue, she's chewing on a stick of hay or wheat there, or grass. And also some of the angles that Paul Smith uses, such as this top-down angle here as well. It's very good stuff. Also, I see that perhaps Paul Smith was taking a look at other artists of the period, mid-80s. I see a touch of Dave Gibbons in his figure work, different from his first year on the Uncanny X-Men, that iconic year-long run. And I also see a little influence of John Romita Jr., his successor on that title as well, in the kind of the figure work there on Rogue. So little changes in his style have taken place since 1983. And again, continuing this scene between Northstar and Rogue, this really good storytelling on this page, where Rogue reveals, in contrast to Northstar, without her powers, she'd be everything, because of course Rogue sees her powers as a curse. And then that blade of grass that she's chewing on is plucked from her mouth by Northstar, and he's wondering, conjecturing about where she got it. And so she explains, the other side of those mountains, so those snow-covered mountains, there's a whole field of it along the bay. And Northstar explains, this is summer grass, prairie stock. It doesn't grow north of the tree line, especially not in midwinter. The weather's too harsh. So he tells Rogue to stay there, and he'll bring the others from the plane. So he basically gets the plane to follow him, and they're going to touch down in that prairie of grass. So then we're aboard the plane, looking in on the cockpit with Puck and Nightcrawler. Really like the way that Paul Smith has designed Nightcrawler's nose there. It's kind of like a beaky nose, like a Roman nose. Looks good. And I like the contrast of the two profiles of Puck with his boxer's nose there. And as I said, Nightcrawler with his more Roman style nose. So there they are going, and in the back of the plane, Michael Two Young Man, aka Shaman, is looking after Snowbird. She's sick. She's the one who sensed the wrongness in the north of Canada, and she's getting sicker as time is wearing on. So he instructs Puck that they've got to land the plane so that he can treat her on the ground. And they're waiting in the prairie of grass. A lot of detail there with all those blades of grass. Is Rogue and North Star, and the plane is touching down here. Nice little use of a screen tone there as well. Everybody getting off the plane. Now this is a point where I want to comment on the flexographic printing process, because if you're looking at this video in high definition, or if you've got your own copy of this comic, you'll note that the coloring, you get a lot of these dots in the coloring, these color dots, and the more fine detailed the art and the more miniature the figures, the more the color actually obscures the line work. So we see there Lockheed flying out of the plane, and he's just kind of like a purple smudge there. And similarly, you get a lot of color errors where the top of North Star's left shoulder there's a little splotch of color on it. So color should be clarifying in comics, especially in comics of the 70s and 80s. But here, this flexographic printing process is actually, the smaller the art, obscuring it. So failing in that regard. And nobody really in the 80s, none of the artists or creative teams anyway, were fans of the flexographic printing process, which was a cheaper way of printing these comics, and it just made for less clear artwork. So Nightcrawler spots something once he gets off the plane. He teleports out onto the top of the plane, and what's he looking at? Unglaublich, unbelievable, he exclaims. Let's turn the page. We get a really great double page spread here of, look at this, a huge walled citadel city with some Norse type motifs in the design of the city. It's reminiscent, for Marvel Comics readers, somewhat of Asgard. And of course that is not accidental, because who's behind things in this 2-issue miniseries? Well, it's Loki. That was revealed in the first part of this issue. So everybody's stunned. Also, the weather is different here in this plain encircled by the mountains. It's like summer, fairy tale weather, says someone, for a storybook setting. Any moment now we'll meet a knight in shining armor. And let's turn the page, and they will indeed meet, in a manner of speaking, such a figure. This is a really great page. I like it when we get these big open panels for Paul Smith's artwork to really shine. And here we have this figure emerging from the citadel, wearing a cloak, and the cloak's hood is pulled back, and it reveals Scott Summers. And very interesting, he is not wearing his ruby quartz lenses, and so we see his blue eyes and a big smile on his face. So this is a bit of a shock. And the professor, who sensed Scott, says, "I almost didn't believe my mind when I sensed your thoughts, lad, your eyes." And Scott says, "Completely cured, Professor. My optic blasts work like they're supposed to, at my mental direction, and only then I'll never need my ruby quartz glasses on my visor again." So that's wonderful, says the professor. He's truly delighted, but he wants to know how. And Scott says, "Oh, just your basic everyday, out of the blue, garden variety miracle." And that is the mystery for the rest of the issue and into the second part of the miniseries as well. And the professor remains curious as to exactly the origin of all these miracles that they're going to encounter. But meanwhile, Rachel, of course, this is her first meeting with her father, who's been on his honeymoon and then absent from the X-Men, having become a married man. But she's from an alternative timeline where Scott Summers is her father, and she hasn't seen him since he died in that timeline. And so she thinks to herself, "Step forward, Rachel, say something. Hi, I'm Rachel, your daughter from another timeline. It's what I want to do more than anything except run away and hide. I should be happy. My side flash was wrong. He's whole and unharmed, but I'm crying inside because I can't stop remembering the moment he, the Scott Summers who was my dad, died. And Kitty, who's Rachel's best friend, thinks, well, poor Rachel, she looks so sad. This must be awful for her. And, you know, the question is, why doesn't Rachel reveal who she is to Scott? Well, part of the reason is she'd have to reveal that he's dead in her alternative timeline. So Scott continues with introductions. They're quickly made. And Scott says, we were wondering when someone would either show up. We figured it'd be either the X-Men or Alpha Flight. There's a pretty fair betting pool about which team would arrive first. So the two arrive together, and Scott spies Rachel hanging at the back and says that there's something strangely familiar about her. And then Rachel psionically communicates to the professor, please don't tell him, X-Men keep my secret. Cyclops mustn't find out who I am until I tell him. So the professor agrees and covers for Rachel, saying that simply she's a new student, a telepath. Her training is at a crucial stage. That is why she's with me instead of back home studying with the New Mutants. She has no code identity as yet. Her name is Rachel. So Scott says, pleased to meet you, and I'm sure you've all got questions. So into the Citadel they go. So there's really nice work here from Paul Smith in terms of the horizon line here, and the way he's using 1 point perspective to have all the characters standing on that horizon line. And you get to see their relative heights as well. But in that 1 point perspective, Rachel there way at the back. And then again here as they're walking into the center of the Citadel with all of this interesting Norse-inspired architecture around them. And yeah, I like the way that they're all walking in a line. But again, Paul Smith doing the relative heights of the characters correctly. So we see Colossus there as the tallest of them. We've got Nightcrawler crawling along. And look what I was saying about the flexographic printing. That little purple smudge there is Lockheed. This would look really clear in black and white printing, as it does look in the Black and White Essentials editions. But with the dotty colouring of the flexographic printing process, it's obscured. Like, it's a pity, it's a shame. But again, I like the way that Paul Smith is drawn in, like Rachel there hanging at the back, North Star walking apart from everyone else. So you get to see the personalities of the characters in terms of where they are on the page. Another great double page spread here. As they're about to enter the center of the Citadel, the wooden door opening there, and the professor questioning Scott in terms of like what happened about the plane crash and all of that, and Scott saying, I still have a hard time believing this is actually happening, that it isn't some dream. It really is almost too good to be true. And those are words that will come to pass in the second part of this mini-series. And the professor thinks privately, interesting. Some element in the fabric of the Citadel inhibits my psionic abilities, reflecting my probes back at me. Scott's thoughts have become more difficult to read as well. I wonder, is that cause for alarm? And of course it is. But again, this is really good where we get to see everybody from behind walking into the doorway, and then we see them from the front and Scott with his arms open. It's easier by far to show you. So we get the surprised reactions of the various characters there, and then we get to see everyone from the plane from the beginning of the issue, and they've all been transformed in various ways, and they're wearing again these kind of Norse inspired costumes, but they're kind of Norse inspired costumes but kind of crossed with some modern or even space age design elements. And it's Madeline here, Madeline Pryor, Scott's wife, who welcomes everyone as dear friends to what we hope and praise the shape of our world to come, an earth whereon its children, human and mutant both, will live together forever in peace. So that really would be a fairy tale comic ending for the hopes and dreams of Professor X and the X-Men. Let's turn the page and see how things develop. So we have the professor there shaking Madeline's hand and saying, you've changed. And look how tall she is as well, super tall. I hope in soul as much as body, Professor, she says. Scott wasn't joking when he called this a miracle. We've been blessed with gifts too magnificent to describe. So the professor asks, well, what do you mean I don't understand? And now she's going to demonstrate this power that she's acquired. Because remember, of course, Madeline isn't a mutant. So she says to Puck, dwarfism is a disease, and in your case, a terrible curse, because Puck is constantly in pain from his dwarfism, and he's surprised at how she might know that. And then she gives herself a code name. As Anodyne, I can heal both, if you'll but take my hand. So he does. Be brave, my friend, she says. Be strong, trust in me as in yourself, and all will be well. So he's burning there, but there's no pain. And then he feels his own internal pain disappear. It's me that doesn't hurt, he thinks. For the first time in decades, the pain is gone. And then he gets his size back. The dwarfism is cured. And he thinks to himself, or he says rather, not too shabby. And he says to Heather, I always wanted to look you straight in the eye. But then he kind of falls over because he's not used to being to his center of gravity being so high. So Heather catches him, and Madeline says, I'm afraid, Puck, your next few days will be something of an ordeal while your body accustoms itself to its new dimensions. But he responds, that's a small price, Mrs. Summers. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. And she responds, seeing you walk again, hearing your laughter is thanks enough. So everything is going well, very well, but is it all too well? So now other characters are going to get their wishes, and we move on to Walter Lankowski, where Anodyne uses her power on him because when he transforms into Sasquatch, becoming more and more bestial. So that's cured by Anodyne. And then he grabs his beloved, which is Aurora. And Anodyne uses her powers on her as well, while she's kind of encompassed by the flames there. So, of course, Aurora suffers from a split personality. Northstar there is horrified. He demands in French that his sister be freed. And both Rogue and Wolverine hold him back. Look at her, Jean-Paul, says Rogue. Look at them both. They're neither of them hurting. They're happy as clams. Madeline's trying to do him some good. You really want to stop that? So it looks like there's been a success. And Aurora says, Je suis Jean-Marie. Who is Aurora? Who is Jean-Marie? Oh, Walter, the madness is gone. For the first time since I was une petite jeune fille, I feel whole. And you, my heart? And he says he feels great. So both of them healed, but look who's suspicious. It is Shaman. He thinks to himself, could such a wondrous talent aid Narya? Snowbird, she didn't come with us. Why didn't I notice? How could I have been so careless? So Shaman doesn't reveal his thoughts entirely to his teammates. He continues thinking to himself, ever since we arrived, I've felt dazed and a fraction out of focus, as if my spirit had wandered away from my body. Why is that? And will it get worse? I like the variation of the layout here, the open border panel. It's a device I always like to see, and it's one that, budding artists should always remember, just to give a little bit of visual interest to their layout on a page. So off he goes, thinking to himself, my age must be catching up with me. I've failed Narya so as both physician and friend. And as he's walking out of those huge wooden doors, Aurora returns. She went ahead of him. The aircraft is empty, Shaman. There's no sign of Snowbird anywhere. So Wolverine says he'll track her. And the other two crewmates from the original plane, Rodriguez and Wilson, elect to follow Wolverine. They say, it's because of us, you people came here, we feel responsible, and three of us can cover a lot more ground a lot faster than a loner. And Wolverine, in typical fashion, very laconically says, suit yourself. So I like that characterization. And again, look at the perspective here. This 1 point perspective, really good. And the body language that Paul Smith works into Wolverine, the way he's hunched over there. It's really well done. Meanwhile, within the Citadel, It's time for a feast. Again, you can just see how big Madeline is there beside Scott. Fascinating, thinks the professor. Each member of Madeline's party has been raised to their ultimate human potential. They have become true Homo sapiens superior. So one of them, Cornucopia, has provided all of the food, and she can also provide food, not food, but clothing. And so she reclothes Colossus here. His costume was ripped, and some of the others as well. And Kitty thinks, I wonder, could Miss Ballinger conjure up enough to single-handedly end famine and want? Wouldn't that be something? And Colossus here thinks, yeah, it would. That is a dream worth dying for. But I think there is something else. There's kind of like a little bit of a romantic moment as well between Kitty and Colossus, where she tells him it's a cute outfit. It suits him, so he's a little bit embarrassed there. And then Rogue comes along. She kind of pops up a little sheepishly with her hands behind her back. Again, great body language from Paul Smith. And she asks Madeline whether maybe Madeline could use her powers on Rogue to help her with her mutant power, because Rogue kind of sees her mutant power as a sickness in a way, which of course emerged earlier from her dialogue with Northstar. And so Anodyne says, okay, well, let's try. So Rogue is encompassed by that fire. She doesn't feel any different afterwards. So she tests, Northstar volunteers to test, for Rogue to test whether the dampening of her power has been a success. So he reaches his hand towards her. They touch, nothing happens, and then she gives him a big kiss there as well. And then we have the professor here. This is really interesting. The professor is still wondering about the genesis of these various abilities, as he says. And Scott says, the answer's easy. We'll show it to you after dinner. But as to where it came from, your guess is as good as ours. The power isn't evil, sir, or hostile. But if you want proof, you're welcome to probe my mind, and Madeline's as well. So the professor closes his eyes, and he does it, and he thinks their thoughts are wholly their own, and so far as they know, all they've told us is the truth. The question remains, unfortunately, how much do they know? And then he gets a big surprise, and his eye pops open, and Scott asks him, is there something wrong, Professor? You look surprised. And he says, small wonder, Cyclops, when I scan for 2 minds and find 3. So Madeline's pregnant. She knows it, and Scott doesn't. So he's taken by surprise. But look at this. There's another person taken by surprise, and that's Rachel. So Kitty reacts instinctively. It's great. You're going to have a baby. And Rachel is thinking of herself. But is it the girl that'll grow up to be me? So in a sense, this is the first appearance of Cable, of Nathan Christopher Summers. It's not his appearance, but it's the first existence of Cable in Marvel Comics. Kind of intriguing that, technically speaking. So Scott is delighted, and he shares a kiss with his wife there. And Madeline knows the sex of the baby, that it is a son that they're going to have. Your son's going to be perfect. So that shocks Rachel. She drops her food and drink there. A boy. But I was firstborn, an only child, she thinks to herself. This means whatever happens, I'll never be. So she races off. Kitty goes after her. The professor realizes what's going on, of course, and tells Shadowcat to go after her. Lockheed going as well. And Kitty thinking, I wish I knew how to help her. But then we switch back to Shaman, and he tells his daughter Talisman to go after Shadowcat, and tells her, more importantly, we still know too little about this place. Despite Cyclops' assurances, I'm far from satisfied. This is a splendid opportunity to learn. So off she goes, and she thinks to herself, and I don't really mind much. As an archaeologist, I've been hoping for a chance to do some exploring. And who is this watching her from the shadows? as she leaves from the central chamber of the Citadel. That's a little mystery there. And back inside, the professor is told not to worry from the architect of the Citadel. I built this Citadel. It's perfectly safe. There's nothing in it that can hurt anyone. And Mr. Ross here says, you see, Professor, Carla can feed the world. Paul, how's it? There's no limit to the good we can do. And what is his gift? Well, he was the guy who was the big reader in the first part of this issue. And he says, I'm sort of a living library. Through me, the knowledge of the ages, every book ever written, every story ever told is yours for the asking. But the professor's only got one question at this moment. And that is, what is the source of these amazing powers? And so we're going to see it on this page. And we get a great sense of scale here in Paul Smith's designs. For this, the magic fountain, it reaches from the roof of the sky to the heart of the world. So everybody's looking in amazement at this magic fountain, and Heather walks right out on the platform, out into the heart of it. Northstar comes up. He's worried. He says, what are you doing, woman? Where are you going? And Heather hears singing in the light calling to her, so she walks into it despite Northstar's concerns and warning, and she emerges from it transformed. And again, we see that kind of Norse motif in the costume in which she emerges. Her eyesight, she's no longer short-sighted. She is super big, just like Madeline emerged from the same magic fountain. And what's her power? Who's asking her this? It is Puck asks her. She says, I'm not sure, but I think to lead. Because in the first part of this issue, she was worried what her place with Alpha Flight was since she had no powers. And Nightcrawler says to Professor X, do you realize the implications? This fantastic light has the capability of making everyone on Earth a superpowered being like us. Think of it, we mutants will no longer be outcasts. There'd be no more need to hate or be hated. The professor's pondering, so it would seem, Nightcrawler, but he remains suspicious. It's the goal I've sought my entire adult life. Why then am I so suspicious? What will it take to put my doubts to rest? And then there is a complication. There is something that goes wrong, and it concerns Shaman. There emerges from his medicine man pouch all of these demons. The Sarsi enchanter has no powers of his own. When in need, he reaches into his medicine bag, and the appropriate charm comes automatically to hand. The pouch is his gateway to the myriad realms and states of being. It somehow keeps them all contained, providing an orderly framework to a universe of transcendent chaos. But now, those barriers have been broken down. The madness is loose to consume both Shaman and his world. But why should that be? But it gives Paul Smith a great opportunity here to show all these demonic kind of creatures and designs for them. So it's pretty inventive stuff from him. And one of them looks like Lockheed there. Kind of intriguing, that. So Madeline moves to assist Shaman and grabs the pouch from his side, throws it to Aurora and Northstar, and they race away with all the demons following. That's a great sequence there. And so they're heading away, and Northstar feels he was right not to trust the place. He says to his sister, see, Jean-Marie, it can bring only misery. But she demurs and says, to me, brother, to Sasquatch and Puck and Heather, to Captain Pryor and her friends, a strange misery that makes us all so happy. So Northstar says, it will explain this, like what's happening here. She says, I can't, but surely with all our superpowers, old and new, we can heal our friends as we can bring hope to the world. You dream, little sister, says Northstar. So he's just not convinced. So there's a number of skeptics in the party, including Northstar, Shaman, and Professor X. And Shaman now is doing poorly. He's ill. The creatures hurt him terribly, says Madeline. Try as I might, my healing talent has no effect on his wounds. So how can that be? And she concludes, this is the cliffhanger ending for issue 1. Forgive me, Alpha Flight, but Michael, Two Young Men is dying. And that means Snowbird is dying, Shaman is dying. What is going on? And with him, perhaps a dream, to be concluded in X-Men and Alpha Flight number 2, on sale next month. And there's an advertisement here for Nightcrawler's miniseries by Dave Cockrum. So another comic from 1985. And there you go. I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on issue 1, part 1 of the 2-part crossover between X-Men and Alpha Flight. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section to the video. If you enjoyed my reviews and commentary, please like the video in YouTube and consider sharing it. Really helps the channel. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for content like this.